Mistletoe. Written by WhenSarahSmiles on archiveofourown.org. It was the first winter after All Might's retirement. Though Christmas loomed around the corner, it was difficult for anyone on campus to show their festive spirit. Villain activity was on the rise, dragging heroes' credibility through the mud. In a school full of heroes in training, tension and worries were running high. As a first year on the student council, it was a difficult atmosphere for you to bear. UA's usually bubbly students had turned anxious, wary of the growing need for them in society, even though it came with far less respect. As winter continued and the days grew shorter, you worried yourself silly, brainstorming ways to lift their spirits from the confines of your bedroom. When the time for student council came, you had all but run yourself ragged. Your effort was not in vain, though. Speaking with your fellow student representatives, along with Principal Nezu, you offered the idea of starting Christmas early. This year would be the first Christmas in Heights Alliance, the new boarding facilities on campus. Though many of the students would return home for the holiday, you were certain some would remain in the grounds. Either way, if you brought Christmas forward, putting up decorations, offering Christmas foods in the cafeteria, or even creating a snow day through others' quirks, everyone could experience some much-needed festive fun. To your delight, the council approved of your idea, and Mr. Principal offered equipment and facilities to help you, least of all the school's extensive hoard of Christmas decorations. After making preparations, it was time to fill campus with festive cheer. Based on quirk and location, each of the council members was assigned 2 dormitories to decorate. Though you were from Class 1C, the General Education Department, the council tasked you with decorating dorms 1A and 1B, the Heroes Department, so that 1C could be turned into a winter wonderland in your absence. You didn't complain. You loved the idea of returning from a hard evening of work to a surprise Christmas paradise. The day of decorating arrived. Your lessons dragged slowly, almost painfully so. You couldn't help sighing in relief when the finishing bell rang. You dashed from class back to your dormitory, changing out of your uniform in record-breaking time, then headed out towards the large storage sheds by the PE grounds. They had been filled to bursting with decorations, mostly old, but some only recently whipped up by the support department. You had to hand it to them. They had put the utmost care into their creations. 33 identical Christmas trees lay along one wall, with an assortment of tinsel, lights, bells, and other goodies nestled below their lower branches in cardboard boxes. When the other council members arrived, you worked as a team, loading the decorations onto 17 separate carts, all made for purpose by, once again, the support department. The council members tasked with decorating the support dormitories were planning to go all out, leaving Christmas chocolates and extra special gifts as a way of thanks for all their help. When the carts were loaded, you wished each other good luck, then set out towards the dormitories. Putting the finishing touches on Class 1B's front doors, you grinned to yourself, bubbling over with festive excitement. You couldn't help it. The sight of 32 balconies coated in tinsel, baubles, and garlands was enough to thaw even the grumpiest of Grinch's hearts. Completing your work, you pulled the cart along by the handle towards Class 1A's dormitory, using air pressure, your quirk, to ease the strain on your arms. You could manipulate the air currents around you, creating gusts of wind to pull and push objects towards you in concentrated bursts. Keeping a stream of wind behind the cart, you kept the wheels moving with little to no effort on your body, only altering the cart's direction when needed. Approaching 1A's dormitory, your lackluster quirk made you sigh. You'd applied for UA in hopes of being accepted onto the hero course, but the aptitude test had landed you in the General Education Department. What was worse, you'd found out you'd missed the threshold by only a few people. You couldn't use your quirk to save others or to take down villains if the need arose, so you were stuck learning everyday applications for your power. Stopping in front of 1A's dorm, staring as high as the top floor, You smirked. Okay, your quirk felt lame in comparison to the likes of the sports festival top 3 winners, but it still had its uses. You took one of the large boxes of decorations from the cart, holding it steadily just above the ground. Concentrating, you focused the air down below the box, then up. You let go, but the box hovered in front of you, caught in your quirk's updraft. Setting your sight on one of the dormitory's lowest balconies, you created a careful set of updrafts towards it, pushing the box through the air with one final gust of wind against its back. It landed neatly on the balcony with a gentle clatter. You were careful to be quiet. You had started your evening of decorating late to begin with. Now, with one fully decorated dormitory in your wake, the night was nearly at its peak, stars twinkling brightly above you. With classes to go to tomorrow, most of the students were asleep, so you had to cushion the landings of anything moved. Taking care, you floated a box onto each of the 32 balconies, holding your breath as you tried to reach the highest floor. The balconies there teetered on the limits of your control radius. In the end, you stood on the cart to give you that extra bit of reach. You positioned yourself below the first balcony. Lifting one foot, you wobbled, adjusting the air pressure below you to take your weight. Then, when you were stabilized, you lifted the other leg, pushing a second updraft beneath you. Holding your arms wide, you steadied yourself. Learning to use your quirk on yourself had been one of the hardest assignments in Class 1C so far, and at first it had terrified you. It was akin to flying, and something you had never imagined possible until your teacher assured you it was. It had taken months of constant scrapes, aches, and concussions, but eventually you had gotten the hang of it. Now it was nearly second nature to you. Pushing yourself up through the air, you landed lightly on the balcony railing, using a gust against your back to stop you from slipping backwards. Using the gaps in the box of decorations as air pockets, you blew tinsel and string lights towards you, catching them with outstretched fingers. You set to work, stretching to reach the wall above the balcony, holding yourself steady with gusts behind, in front, and below you. I wonder whose room I'm decorating, you pondered, glancing at the closed curtains behind the sliding doors. You smiled to yourself, aware it could be someone you'd one day see fighting in the streets, saving lives. Though it made you jealous that you were on a different path, it only solidified your resolve to work harder so that maybe, just maybe, one day you could transfer into the heroes department. Working quickly and efficiently, you floated from balcony to balcony, decorating the building in festive wonder. After completing the first 2 floors, you descended a stairway of wind to the ground, stopping for a quick drink of water. Your quirk did not tax your body much when you used it on smaller, lighter objects, but holding yourself steady while you worked was another matter. With time, your stamina and durability would grow, but for now you wiped the sweat from your brow, gulping great mouthfuls to reinvigorate yourself. You heaved a sigh, stretching your arms and back out, then returned to work. The first room on the next floor was deserted. The curtains were drawn back, revealing a bland, empty shell with nothing more than a stripped bed and the wooden slated floor. You decorated it, nevertheless. The lights and trimmings were as much for passers-by as they were for the room's occupants. You hovered across to the next room. The curtains were closed. You did your best to be quiet, aware someone might be asleep inside. Pushing the 3 gusts of air against you, you leant out over the balcony, attaching a strip of Christmas lights to the wall above. Being careful to secure each individual light, not wanting them to fall down in your absence, you concentrated your quirk, creating thin, fast bursts of wind that worked like a hammer, battering the fastenings unbreakably into place. Once you had finished, you dissolved the gusts of air and dropped down quickly, picking out a second set of decorations. As you floated back onto the balcony railing, you saw, or thought you saw, a sudden flash of light through a gap in the curtains. You stayed still, balanced by your quirk, but you did not see the light again. Shaking your head, assuming the flash had been a figment of your tired mind's imagination, you carried on, carefully securing the leaf and holly-covered garland along the wall above the room. It was a pretty thing, once you had finished. You dropped back onto the balcony floor, then picked a pair of red Christmas bells from your box of furnishings. You reignited your quirk, floating onto the corner of the railing before securing yourself in place. With the utmost concentration, aware of the risk you were taking for the sake of nice decorations, you stood on the tips of your toes, reaching forwards to press the first of the bells securely into the wall so that even the strongest of winds could not blow it away. As you retracted your hand, falling back onto the flats of your feet, suddenly the balcony door snapped open, shocking you enough to break your concentration. The sound of someone shouting angrily at you all but disintegrated your quirk, dissolving the protective winds around you. Unable to keep your balance, you caught a glimpse of the person's ash blonde hair before you lost your footing and slipped backwards over the ledge. You shrieked, pushing your hand down as you attempted to force a gust up from the ground to counterbalance you. But before your quirk had time to react, a hand snapped around your wrist in a vice-like hold, pulling you up through the air.
"What the hell do you think you're doing?"
the ash blonde demanded, barely giving you time for your feet to touch the balcony floor before he had pulled you inside, snapping the partitioning doors shut behind you. He flung you across the room in one strong movement. Whether by luck or by aim, you landed comfortably amongst his bedding, but had no chance to praise your landing when he rounded on you, his steely crimson eye glaring into you with agitated rage. Seemingly you did not answer fast enough for his liking. His clenched fist landed in the wall beside your head, and you shrieked before you could stifle such a pathetic noise.
"I said,"
he forced out through gritted teeth.
"What were you doing on my balcony?"
You took in his appearance, from his messy bed head to the glare you recognized from somewhere. It took you a moment, but then you realized you had seen him before. He was the violent winner of this year's sports festival, Katsuki Bakugou. Your throat ran dry. You noted his pajamas first, the black tank top that defined the musculature of his chest and arms, and his red loose-fitting pants. Then you caught his unforgiving expression. You knew from the sports festival that Bakugou was not someone to mess around. He was ruthless and harsh, and did not care for anyone else's safety. "The council!" you squeaked, unable to make your vocal cords cooperate. His jaw clenched as his patience wavered, but you could not force your lips to form another syllable. He thrust his other hand towards you, tiny sparks jumping from his fingertips threateningly.
"If you're pulling some sort of funny business,"
he warned, and you could feel the threat of his words as he leaned into you, one hand holding himself up against the wall overhead, the other thrust towards your face. You whimpered, aware how strong his quirk was. He had wiped out Shoto Todoroki, the now #1 hero, Endeavor's son, during the sports festival. He was the last person you wanted to piss off. "No, the council," you stammered, forcing the words out. "I'm on the council. We're decorating," you squeaked again, forcing your hands around your mouth to stifle your fear as his hands spat sparks into your face.
"What?"
he barked, his patience drawing thin. You whimpered, pushing your hands up around your face, daring to ignite your quirk to protect yourself from the explosions you knew were sure to come. "I'm decorating for Christmas!" You heard him click his tongue. You had no idea if your response had appeased him or only pissed him off. Quickly, you realized it was the latter.
"Are you fucking stupid?"
You flinched away from his words, even when he retracted his hand.
"Why would you put shitty decorations outside my room?"
He was too close for you to fight back. You didn't dare try using your quirk offensively, not against him. You could only let him rant, inwardly defending yourself. You were here to lighten everyone's spirits, to give them relief when the villain situation seemed bleak. You bit your lip, looking up into his resentful crimson eyes. Before you realized it, you'd spoken aloud. "Don't be a Scrooge." His eye twitched, You pressed your hands to your mouth, realizing you hadn't kept your thoughts to yourself, but it was too late to retract what you'd said.
You sneak into my room, you wake me up, you decorate my balcony without my fucking permission, and...
You gasped, hearing a knock at the door. Bakugou cut himself off, swiveling his head to address the noise.
What do you want?
After a brief pause, someone asked hesitantly.
Everything okay in there?
You kept quiet, refusing to provoke the hyper-aggressive sports festival winner, but Bakugou barked a response, replying just as angrily as if he were addressing you.
Go back to bed, shitty hair.
The person rapped on the door a second time, and Bakugou clicked his tongue, agitated that they would not leave.
Fuck off, idiot!
Jeez,
You heard the male say.
fine. We share a wall. Just keep it down. Some of us are trying to sleep.
Bakugou mumbled through agitated breaths, his body still wavering above yours with one arm pinned to the wall.
I fucking know that, shithead!
He clicked his tongue again, then pulled away from the wall, unpinning you from the bed. He ran his hand up through his ash blonde hair, then threw you a haughty glare.
Get lost. Finish your shitty decorating and leave me to sleep.
His anger had quelled somewhat, and you knew you had his neighbor to thank. Wasting no time, you pulled yourself from the bed, landing wobbly onto Bakugou's floor, still dazed from both his anger and his quick shift out of it. You bowed apologetically. You weren't sure if he saw it, as he had disappeared into his ensuite by the time you lifted your head. You backed away onto the balcony and closed the door behind you. With a glass separating the pair of you, you let your knees buckle. At last. The curtains on his side were closed and you were glad. Your face felt hot, even as the cool night's breeze hit you. You put your hands to your cheeks, hoping they weren't as red as you thought they were. You could still smell him. The gentle hints of oak and spice as he'd leant over you, threatening you to talk. It wouldn't leave your nose, and what's more, it was a dangerously pleasant smell. He'd scared you senseless, but for some reason you couldn't forget the image of him leaning over you, his defined arm muscles tensing to support himself, his strong jaw clenched, waiting on your answer. You put yourself back to work, hoping to shove the memory away so you could concentrate. You finished Bakugou's balcony as quickly as possible, gazing to and from the curtains in case he reappeared, swearing vengeance on you. He didn't. Thankfully. You floated the empty decorations box back to the cart and moved on. Floating onto the next balcony over, you noticed a glow at the edge of the curtains. What's more, the door was ajar. Hoping to avoid any more aggressive introductions, you worked as silently as your quirk and limbs would allow. Seemingly, though, it was not quiet enough.
Hey there!
Thankfully, though, you were startled by the noise. Your feet were securely on the balcony floor, your quirk briefly deactivated whilst you rummaged through your assortment of decorations. You had established one of the two red bells was missing. A spiky-haired redhead had poked his face through the curtains, pulling the partitioning door back out of curiosity. Unlike Bakugou, this guy welcomed you with a smile. If anything, it made you feel guiltier for disturbing him. "I'm sorry," you said sincerely. "Am I bothering you?" In your effort to find both bells, you had become tangled in a vine of string lights, and only now did you realize how silly you looked. If the redhead thought the same, he did not show it. He shook his head, pointing at the lights bunched in your hands.
Was it you I heard Bakugou yelling at then?
The penny dropped. As soon as he had said it, you connected his voice to the person who had interrupted Bakugou's interrogation. "You saved me," you admitted honestly. The boy tutted lightheartedly, rolling his eyes.
Don't mind him. Anger's his default setting. He's a good guy, really.
It was hard for you to agree. You were trying to do a nice thing, decorating, and there was no way it warranted so much of his regression. You could still see the venom in his eyes, pinning you to the bed in interrogation. Granted, anyone would panic if a stranger appeared on their balcony in the middle of the night. And granted, you hadn't given him much of an explanation when he asked, too intimidated by his hostility. Your throat clogged, suddenly realizing your error. You had been so fixated on lifting everyone's spirits that you hadn't thought how your acts of kindness might appear to someone not in the know. Actually, the whole reason UA had become a boarding school was to ensure the safety of its students from the rising villain threat. Everyone was on edge. And yet, without hesitation, without knowing who you were, Bakugou had rescued you from falling off the balcony, pulling you to safety faster than there could possibly have been time to determine whether you were friend or foe. Even when he had thrown you across his room, you had landed amongst his bedding. He had made the effort not to hurt you, even when all your actions had screamed small-time villain, no matter how innocent you knew your actions really were. Perhaps you were wrong about him. Perhaps there was more to him than his angry, uncaring exterior. You noticed the gleam of sweat along the redhead's forehead when he shifted in the doorway, moving to lean against the frame, then realized he was in his training gear. It shocked you that anyone would be training this late. Then again, he was part of the heroes department. They probably had to train whenever they could fit it in. The way his skin glistened, and the way his chest rose and fell in time with his ragged breathing, it seemed as though he had been at it for a while. Which only made you question what he'd said, knocking on Bakugou's bedroom door earlier. There was no way he'd been trying to sleep. It was more likely he heard your bleak predicament and came to your rescue. If he thought you needed rescuing though, what did that say about Bakugou? After the redhead offered you a warm drink to keep you going, one which you graciously declined, you returned to decorating and he shut the door, leaving you to work. It was strange how two polar opposite personalities could share an adjoining wall. The redhead had been nothing but welcoming. Bakugou had been anything but. As you completed the finishing touches to the balcony, leaning over the side to fasten a second set of string lights to the railings, a memory suddenly came to you. You had seen Bakugou's face before, more recently than at the sports festival. You couldn't believe you'd forgotten. An overwhelming feeling of guilt swelled inside you, realizing where you'd seen him. Katsuki Bakugou, winner of this year's sports festival, was also Katsuki Bakugou, the student kidnapped by the League of Villains a few months ago. He had been targeted specifically and kidnapped by the same organization who had forced All Might into retirement. Suddenly, his actions seemed less irrational. You pushed your hand to your forehead, cursing your tactlessness. No wonder he'd looked ready to murder you. Maybe he thought you were the League, taking a second shot at him. The guilt weighed on you over the next few balconies, and the memory of his crimson eyes followed you. But the longer you spent decorating, the easier it was to turn your mind to other things, replacing guilt with festive warmth. When you had finished with the balconies, you returned to the ground to start on the final set of decorations. The most important set of decorations, the Christmas tree. You dressed it on the ground when you were satisfied, readjusting tinsel and baubles too many times to count. You lifted it through the air with your quirk. There was nothing quite like having to hold a fully adorned tree together, perfectly upright, with wind. It was a fine line between accomplishing and overcompensating. All it needed was one mild gust in the wrong place to unhinge a string of tinsel or send a bauble soaring off into the night. A bead of sweat ran down your face. It was cold against your skin, a stark contrast to the heat swelling in your body from overexertion. After a long evening of decorating, you were nearing your limits. You could feel the ache in your arms as you held them aloft, pointing them towards the moving tree to hone your quirk towards it. Your bed was calling you. You couldn't wait to nestle under your duvet, warm in the glow of accomplishment. You only hoped your effort would lift at least a few students' spirits. You were itching to see how your dormitory looked, decked in all sorts of festive wonder. There was no way it could look as spectacular as you'd imagined, but at this time of year, seeing something as small as a dog in a Christmas jumper was enough to make you gush. Hovering the tree over the lower, flat-roofed section of the dormitory, a convenient terrace in the center of the building, inaccessible to the students, you pulled your concentration to lower it down with as little wobbling as possible. You apologized profusely, clenching one eye shut when it landed with a loud, hollow thump. Hopefully that wasn't enough to wake anyone else. You sliced the wind away, leaving the tree to stand alone in its metal brackets, protected from the weather on 3 sides. You exhaled in relief, glad the hardest part was over. You backed away, taking in your handiwork. The dormitory glittered and sparkled, but you still had 1 or 2 tasks to complete. You filled the courtyard with oversized decorative presents, acrylic winter-themed animals, and a runway of single-colored lights up to the doors. Finally, you turned your attention to the dormitory's entranceway. After coating it in pine cones, holly, foliage, and whatever scraps were left in the box of decorations, you added the finishing touches by securing a festive wreath to the center of each door, then attached a sprig of mistletoe over each. You chuckled to yourself, wondering how much chaos they might cause over the next few weeks. It was an old tradition, but you were certain some people still took part, and it repulsed others. Either way, the mistletoe's purpose was to distract everyone, and you were certain it would. You heard his voice before you saw him. The raw anger of it made you pull back, just able to fix the sprig in place before he threw open the door to yell at you.
I told you to fuck off.
Though you couldn't help flinching, you remembered the redhead's advice to you. That Katsuki Bakugou, below the level of hostility, was actually a good guy. You dusted the fallen pine needles out of your hair and off the tops of your shoulders, and nodded. You would look past his anger. I know. I'm sorry. I'm just finishing up. Bakugou gripped the edges of the door frame, using it to lean forwards, taking in the sights of your festive imagination. For a second, he stayed quiet. You used the opportunity to apologize for earlier, noting that his eyes seemed far less terrifying than when he dragged you into his room. You hoped to take advantage of his better mood. I'm sorry for earlier too. If he heard you, he made no sign of acknowledging your words, choosing to look past you into the cool winter's night, his eyes holding nothing but vacant contempt. You held your breath, watching his crimson irises flitter as he gazed across the landscape, waiting for some kind of response. When nothing came, you added, feeling the guilty bubble rising up inside you. I didn't mean to worry you.
Fuck off,
he replied coolly. His gaze fell on you, his brows drawn down into points as ripples of anger traced out along his forehead.
Get off your damn high horse. You couldn't scare shit.
It was difficult for you to see the redhead's point. If Bakugou was a good guy, he had a funny way of showing it. You put your hand on your hip, brows furrowed. You bit your tongue, holding in a retort. As arrogant as his attitude was, some of it was probably based on resentment. You'd clearly caused enough of a ruckus to wake him, or at least draw his attention, and he seemed like the kind of guy who wasn't used to people ignoring his commands. When he'd sent you away earlier, he probably assumed that you'd done just that, which meant he thought you were someone else trying to break through the front door. You were starting to think even the most magical festive displays wouldn't distract him from his unease. Look, you said frankly. Your straightforwardness shocked you. His piercing gaze seemed set to kill, but of everyone on campus, he seemed the most on edge after everything that had happened to him. Nobody wants to find a stranger on their balcony, not when there's a massive rise in villain activity. But don't worry, UA is one of the safest places you could be right now. The teachers will come running if there's so much as a sniff of an intruder. You only realized how patronizing you sounded after you said it. You meant it to come out as reassurance, a friendly pep talk to help him sleep. In your venture to help a worried student, as was your job as part of the council, you'd forgotten that perhaps Bakugou, winner of the sports festival, the boy who stood his ground against 8 villains at once, or so the reports say, maybe didn't need reassurance from you. You weren't used to interacting with the heroes department. Normally the students were on your level, where your reassurance could actually affect them. His response came with no warning. Sure, his general ambience was set to anger by default, but it was nothing compared to what came next.
And what?
He asked threateningly, his body tense but his voice low and calm. It was a shift too far away from what you were used to. You felt on edge. Your throat ran dry and you gulped, but to no effect.
You think your shitty decorations help?
What? Well,
You think fairy lights and tinsel will make everyone forget what's happening when they spend every day hearing how society's going to shit?
Cracks appeared in his calm composure and his gritty voice grew louder. You felt a sting, his words cutting deeper than you'd expected.
What about you? Acting full of yourself, saying the teachers will help like you know what's going on. I haven't seen you in the fucking hero class before. You don't know shit.
Hey! You felt his words crumpling you, but there was no way to stop it. He was right. The reality was that you couldn't do much to help. Your effort amounted to Christmas decorations and a shoulder to lean on for those that needed it. I know I'm not in the hero class, but...
Too right you're not. No one on the hero course is brain dead enough to use their quirk to put up worthless Christmas shit. You've got to be part of that remedial general education department, right?
You didn't want to answer him. The way he'd said general education department, like it was worth less than the gravel under his feet. You felt humiliated. What was worse, you felt exactly the same as he did about your quirk. You knew it was a waste, decorating, bouncing through the air, but you weren't allowed to do anything else. You'd lost the privilege by scoring too low on the aptitude test. You rubbed your arm awkwardly, unable to meet his gaze. You fell into submission, keeping your mouth shut, but he wouldn't relent, angrily chipping away at you until he'd broken every fiber of your spirit.
Of course you are.
You flinched at his correct deduction.
So don't tell me how everything's gonna be fine when I'm the one who'll have to save your worthless ass someday. Stick to putting up tacky shit and hope to fuck it make someone's day better, because that's the only way you're gonna make a shit's bit of difference.
You couldn't take it anymore. All you'd wanted was to lighten the mood for everyone. But through your attempt, one single person had managed to voice every one of your innermost worries. Your heart ached, riddled with self-doubt. Please, stop, you begged softly. He clicked his tongue.
Just fuck off.
You looked at him, now that he had finished his barrage against you. His eyes were filled with loathing. The brute force of his anger was gone, replaced with a softer, more sustainable hatred. You knew being on his balcony had annoyed him, but he had no right to make you feel so small for trying to do a nice thing. You couldn't understand how someone, a trainee hero no less, could be so cruel. You refused to show him what his words had done to you, lifting your gaze up to stave off the prickle of tears in the corners of your eyes. Only then you saw the mistletoe. Bakugou followed your gaze up. He stiffened. Letting out a disheveled moan, your voice cracking, you turned away and stormed off across the courtyard, feeling upset, angry, and embarrassed. You kept your head high, striding past the forgotten and now empty cart, blinking back your cursed tears. If you'd only been able to hold them in. Then again, the sight of the mistletoe had knocked the fight out of you. If you had dared stay longer, he would have only scolded you again. You doubted he bothered with the tradition, calling your decorative efforts tacky. All you wanted was to cheer everyone up. Your heart broke. Just a little. Shinso was sitting in the common room when you returned to 1C's dormitory, reading through a magazine. It was late, but he rarely slept, and you weren't surprised to see him. You hurried through the dimly lit room, furiously dabbing at your eyes. You felt his gaze on you. You begged him to leave you alone, inwardly praying that he could tell you did not want to talk. Shinso was not the kind of person to go out of his way to get involved in other people's business. That being said, it was a different matter when it concerned his friends.
What's wrong?
Though you wanted to carry on walking all the way through to the stairwell, pretending you had not heard him, the soft spirit in you couldn't ignore when a friend was reaching out to you. You slowed to a stop. Shinso closed his magazine, laying it on a coffee table. You sniffed, dabbing your eyes. His question lingered in the air, the silence dragging on as you tried to fight your embarrassment. It was too late at night for you to confess your dread and fears to a friend, even if you knew he had many of the same worries. The silence carried on. Shinso sat forward, gliding his hand through his purple hair awkwardly.
Look, I won't.
No, I know. I know you wouldn't do that to me. It's just... You felt guilty for not answering him sooner. He was all too used to people refusing his conversation. You clenched your fists, resolving to sit beside him on the couch before you could think twice about heading for the stairs. He crossed one leg loosely over his knee, leaning back with his arms spread lazily over the sofa, seeing your approach. He was in for the long haul, it seemed. Shinso sat quietly through the entirety of your rant, enduring tears, mild bouts of rage, and occasionally offered you a tissue. By the time you had finished, you had abandoned your place beside him and were in the kitchen area instead, sat at the table with a 2-liter tub of ice cream in front of you. Status: currently unopened. You hadn't stopped speaking long enough to eat it. You popped the lid and picked up a spoon, wiping the last of the tears from your eyes. The world was evil. Your life was unfair. Tomorrow you would feel fat for eating the entire tub in one sitting, but right now you wanted comfort food. Shinso came over, leaning with folded arms against one of the counters. He watched you eat grumpily, contemplating your words a few moments more. If you had looked up from the tub of ice cream, you might have noticed his strained, vexed expression.
Traveler?
He asked, keeping his tone casual. You listened to what he had to say, but continued to pout into your food. He tutted when you didn't respond. He could see the hurt in your eyes, and burying it under a mound of sugar was no way to try and solve it.
Hey,
he said again.
He's not worth worrying about.
Suddenly you slammed the spoon down. After everything you had told him, for his first response to be something so bland and dismissive, you could hardly believe him. Shinso, that's the last time I...
Gotcha.
Your body slumped forwards against the table, but only for a moment.
Sorry. Forgive me for this. Sit up.
You sat up.
Don't hate me, but you need to relax. Now,
he said, pushing away from the countertop. He took the spoon off you and resealed the ice cream, putting it back in the freezer.
Go upstairs and get ready for bed. Lie down once you're done, and relax.
Unable to control your body, you had to do as he wished. You left the table and headed for the stairs. You knew his quirk only worked physically, not emotionally, but you were thankful to him all the same for instructing you to relax. Though your mind was still wired and messy, your body felt like it had melted, keeping rigid just enough to let you move. The aches of a strenuous evening of quirk use eased as the tension dropped. Shinso watched you go, making sure that you could navigate the stairs with your now mostly rubber limbs. Once you were out of sight, he sauntered outside, his hands stuffed into his black jeans. Once you had followed Shinso's instructions, changing into your pajama vest and shorts, brushing your teeth and washing your face, your body climbed into bed and you waited. Your worries had eased off somewhere along the way, so when control relinquished back to you, you instantly felt the urge to sleep. Although You were a little resentful towards Shinso for using his quirk on you, especially after he categorically said he wouldn't. You also had to thank him. You felt much better after being stuck on autopilot for 15 minutes. You snuggled down into your duvet, groaning as you stretched your body out, easing yourself to sleep. You flicked off the lights with a switch at your bedside and closed your eyes. Then you opened them, hearing a knock at your door. You didn't want to get up. You were comfortable and warm. Yet the next moment you had slipped out of bed, flicking the lights back on as you did, and had opened your door.
Shinso!
You gasped. He nodded curtly, walking into the room, then closed the door behind him. You stammered, barely able to register what was happening in front of you.
You can't just do that!
Shinso stood, his weight resting on one hip with his arms slung over Bakugo's shoulders as if they were the best of friends. After the antics of the sports festival, you knew they were anything but. Shinso flicked Bakugo on the cheek.
Go on,
he said to the ash blonde.
Say it.
You felt unnerved by the expression on his face. It was blank. There wasn't a hint of anger or irritation in his crimson eyes, like the fire in him was dead. You didn't like it. This wasn't right. Shinso, stop using your
traveler.
You stopped, hearing that name on Bakugo's lips. It caught you off guard, even though you knew he was under Shinso's control.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry I made you cry.
His apology was hollow. You knew these weren't his own words.
I'm sorry for disrespecting your hard work, decorating. I'm sorry for looking down on you. I'm sorry for...
You caught an inkling of resistance. It was only a split second, but Bakugo paused in his deadpan apology, like his entire being was fighting the next words to come out. It shocked you. Only one person had ever managed to break free of Shinso's quirk, and he had broken his own finger in the process. You knew of everything Bakugo had been through, but you still couldn't believe his strength and sheer willpower.
I'm sorry for my shit hair and ugly face.
You glared at Shinso. He shrugged, smirking.
I'm sorry. I hate the guy. Couldn't resist.
The hairs on Bakugo's bare arms were upright. Looking closer, the veins along his neck were pronounced, strained. You knew he was trying to break free with everything he had, no matter how vacant and placid his face appeared. Shinso's smirk grew.
Want him to do anything else before I walk him back to his dorm?
He poked Bakugo's cheek, reveling in the ash blonde's submission.
He deserves it.
No, you said in a quiet breath. Your heart ached, watching them. This isn't... You knew Shinso's intentions were good. You both knew Bakugo would never apologize on his own terms, but you had never expected him to apologize at all. Shinso saw your hesitation and struck it down to a lack of imagination.
Hey, Bakugo,
he mumbled, kicking him lightly on the side of his shoe. You shook your head, horrified by the exchange. Stop, you said weakly, reaching forwards. Shinso was deaf to you, reveling in humiliating the boy who had called him an extra, looked down on him during the sports festival, and had hurt one of the people he called a friend.
Beg them for forgiveness.
To your horror, Bakugo dropped to the floor onto his knees. You couldn't watch this. You couldn't take it. This wasn't what you wanted. Not from him. Not from anyone. There was too much strife beyond Yue's walls to have this happen inside them. Shinso chuckled, watching Bakugo lower himself to the ground, his nose almost pressed to the floor, with an arm tensed either side of him to hold himself up. Seeing one of Yue's strongest heroes groveling at your feet, you couldn't take it. You clenched your eyes shut and balled your hands up into your chest.
Stop it!
You yelled, your tone somewhere between fury and heartache. Stop it! This isn't what I wanted! Shinso took a step back, shocked at your outburst. You could feel the tears welling up out of you, but you'd had enough. I wanted to make people smile. I know my quirk's useless, and I know my decorations suck, but this isn't fair. How are we supposed to protect the world outside with a smile when all we do is worry and argue and resent each other? I tried, okay? I really tried. But all it's done is piss people off and got people in trouble. You gestured to Bakugou, bowing apologetically at your feet. Shinso's smirk dropped. He looked guilty and you were glad, at least, that your words were reaching him. Gingerly, he said,
Sit up.
Bakugou sat up, heaving himself backwards to rest on his knees. Though Shinso had gone about it the wrong way, you knew he had only tried to make you feel better. Thank you, you said honestly. But please let him go. You forced a gentle laugh. If you ever manage to reassign to the heroes department, you'll be working with him. Don't burn your bridges already. He sighed, catching sight of that ever-forgiving nature of yours. He ran a hand through his hair, giving you a quick nod.
Right as always.
He pulled open the door and backed away, leaving Bakugou sat in front of you. Wait! What about—
I'll release him, but I'm putting 2 doors in my lock between us before I do.
You sucked on your teeth, nodding. That was probably for the best. He gave you a curt nod goodbye, waving, then closed your bedroom door behind him. After a moment, you heard his door open and close. A short pause. Then Bakugou came back to life.
I'll kill you, you dead-eyed bastard!
Fortunately, his anger was not directed at you. Bakugou pulled himself up from the floor, then launched himself at your door, cursing everything about Shinso from his hair to his cockiness. Before he could get a grasp on the door handle, though, you had gripped him around the arm, hoping to spare yourself from any more heartache tonight. You didn't want the hospital to be the next place you saw Shinso. You knew you had practically no chance of stopping him, your strength only a mere fraction of his, but when you wrapped your hands around his arm, his rage died a little. He heaved great, raspy breaths, but he did not open the door. You were probably the last person he wanted to see right now, but you had to apologize on behalf of Shinso, since he definitely didn't intend to do it himself. I'm sorry, you said, holding on to Bakugou until you knew he wouldn't bolt. Then you let go, stepping back to give him space. I'm so sorry that Shinso brainwashed you. When I told him I was upset, I never expected him to do this. I shouldn't have said anything. I'm sorry. You hung your head meekly, waiting for his anger to redirect on you, the only available target. He turned, eyes glistening with annoyance, but surprisingly there was nothing more. He almost seemed calm.
Idiot,
he said softly. His expression relaxed, and he shoved his hands lazily into his pockets.
Don't go apologizing for other people's shit. If it's not your fault, don't make it your fault.
No, but—
Seriously, cut it out.
You bit your lip, holding in another apology. You dared to look at him properly, as he had made no effort to leave. Compared to your first 2 interactions with Bakugou, he seemed like an entirely different person. He was still angry, that was a given, but the way his gaze flitted to anything but you could see something bothering him. He scratched the edge of his face, staring at your All Might poster to avoid your gaze. Forget angry. An hour or so ago, you never could have imagined Bakugou had it in him to look so awkward. The way his eyebrows furrowed and relaxed, and how his hand went from his chin to his hair, ruffling it as he continued to stare at your posters, like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Is everything all right? You offered, catching his perplexed expression. He seemed to catch himself, clenching his jaw to throw daggers at you.
Of course it is, idiot!
You raised your eyebrows, caught off guard again by his sharp tongue. This time, though, he seemed to realize what he had said. His eyes widened a fraction. Then he frowned.
Oh, that's not what I meant.
He ruffled both hands through his hair, groaning agitatedly.
Fuck off.
You got the feeling that wasn't directed towards you. When he caught hold of your gaze, his crimson irises did not look threatening. It was strange, seeing any kind of vulnerability in him. He looked lost, like he wanted to say something but he couldn't let himself. When he finally spoke, he sounded annoyed, but that didn't stop you smiling.
Look, you can't cry over a time some fucker insults you. People say crappy shit when they're angry, or upset, or if they're worried.
He glared daggers at you, quickly adding before you could open your mouth.
You dare say I told you so and I'll end you.
Despite the harsh edge to his words, your heart felt lighter hearing them.
You shouldn't care what anyone else says about you. Start giving a shit if you're the one putting yourself down.
Just as you opened your mouth to say something, desperately trying to hold down the smile that wanted to creep onto your face, your wall clock chimed, striking midnight. Bakugou used it as an excuse to leave, his trademark frown replacing the awkward look in his eyes.
Whatever. Never mind.
He turned to the door.
I'm going.
He clearly wasn't used to apologizing, if that's what you could call it, but you appreciated his effort. And it really was an effort. You followed him out, throwing a hoodie over your pajama vest top, and even when he yelled at you for tailing him, you couldn't help but notice how the harshness had dropped from his tone. It felt warmer, somehow, like his guard had dropped. Once he was outside, he stopped dead, his hands stuffed in his pajama pockets. You waited at the door, wondering what had made him still. He ran his hand through his hair, his back to you, the muscles along his shoulder rippling as he moved.
My dorm looks better.
You didn't register what he had said at first. He kept his back to you, but you noticed how the tops of his ears had gone a funny pink color. Then you realized what he was getting at. In all your upset earlier, you hadn't actually noticed how your dormitory had been decked out. You pushed past Bakugou in bare feet, dashing out into the courtyard to look at the finished product. Ah! Your eyes sparkled, taking in the Christmassy scene. It was similar to your design, with a few tweaks here and there, with a beautiful festive tree above the entranceway. You clasped your hands together, gushing as the Christmas feelings took over. In all your excitement over the decorations, you did not notice Bakugou's gaze on you, or the way his mouth curled up at the edges, his hard eyes softening for just a moment. Then you demanded, "This is much better!" A vein pulsed on Bakugou's forehead. You caught his angry, vexed expression only when he growled,
"Oh, just take the goddamn compliment!"
Your cheeks burned red, suddenly realizing that when he had said, "My dorm looks better," he was praising you. You abruptly turned away from him, holding your cheeks, willing them to cool down. You flapped your hands against your face, your head dizzy from the sudden rush of blood to your cheeks. All you could think was that Katsuki Bakugou had just paid you a compliment. The hyper-aggressive sports festival winner, who others actively avoided, had just, in his own way, said something nice to you. You thought your brain was going to fry, overloaded with a sudden fuzzy feeling. And then, as if timing couldn't be worse, your memory flashed back to him leaning over you on the bed, his inviting scent tickling your nostrils. You made a funny squeak, your brain overloading. Bakugou called to you, his aggressive voice sounding less so every time he spoke.
"Don't just stand there, idiot. Do you want to freeze to death?"
You didn't want to rush past him. Your face as red as a cherry, but now that he'd mentioned it, the cold winter's air was nipping at your bare legs. A chill ran up your spine and you cursed him for pointing it out. You hopped from one foot to the next, the cold chill of the courtyard's paving tiles biting your toes. You relented, scurrying back to the warmth of your dormitory's doorway. You kept your head low, hoping to ward away your blush, only it jumped 100 shades deeper when you rushed past Bakugou, bumping into him accidentally in the shoulder, only to smell that same oak and spice scent that had turned you gooey last time.
I'm sorry!
You squeaked, hearing Bakugou grunt. You turned to face him, but didn't dare look up from the floor. Your heart skipped a beat, hearing something you never thought possible from him. He stammered. He cut himself off. You dared to look up at him, then your eyes shot wide, seeing his face nearly as red as your own, his angry expression trying to hide his embarrassment. He bellowed what he had to say, his gritty voice louder than necessary.
Your Christmas shit isn't that shit, okay? It's actually pretty nice, and the fact you worked your butt off just to cheer people up makes it fucking nicer. Don't let anyone say otherwise.
Before you could respond, your face glowing red with your heartbeat in your ears, he gripped the front of your hoodie and yanked you towards him. You squeaked, but he cut you off, crashing his lips to yours. You made a funny sound in the back of your throat, unable to move, unable to think, stuck in the awkward but very pleasant sensation of your lips locked together, the sides of your noses bumping as he held you against him, with the heat on both of your faces banishing away the cold night air. You broke apart, and he pushed you backwards slightly so you could regain your footing. You hadn't noticed how you'd ended up on your tiptoes. He panted and you wobbled, bringing your shaky hands up to touch your lip, feeling cold now that his warmth was gone. You stammered, trying to process what had just happened. What?
It's what it's there for, right?
Bakugou barked, pointing above your head. You looked up and spotted it, the single sprig of mistletoe. It was impossible for your face to turn any redder, but somehow it did. There was something oddly adorable about Bakugou taking part in the mistletoe tradition. You tried to say something, anything, but your mind would only let you focus on Bakugou, his crimson eyes and that goddamn scent of his, like someone had bottled it up and sprayed it straight into your face. He flicked you in the forehead, seemingly able to control his embarrassment better than you.
Shut up.
He turned on his heel, walking away across the courtyard. You watched him go, holding your hands to your cheeks, using your quirk to pull the cool night's air against your face. Then he stopped and looked back at you.
See you tomorrow.
You wondered what he meant, until he stuck his middle finger up at you. A few hours ago you would have felt insulted, but now it looked more like a sign of affection.
You can fuck off if I'm moving that Christmas crap cart for you. Clean up your own tinselly mess.
You laughed, welcoming his Bakugou-style invitation to come over to his. He set off walking, then stopped once more. For a moment he didn't move. Then he turned to face you full on.
Merry early Christmas.
Your heart melted, the biggest grin forcing itself onto your face. Merry Christmas, Bakugou. He flinched, hearing his name on your lips, and turned pink again. He flipped you off and barked at you.
Stop being so mushy and go to bed, you airhead.
You laughed loudly at his quirk-based nickname for you as you waved him off. Once he was gone, you closed the door and leaned against it, crumpling into a puddle on the floor. Christmas coming early had been your best idea ever. You had really only thought of it to help the rest of the student body. You could never have known that you would get an early Christmas present too.